别嘛，囊落雪，俺从这买进过，他囊落雪别嘛。
Dutch Delay, hello and welcome to Earth Day Tibet 2021. My name is Kunchok Dolma Yaklha and I'm your host for this event, which focuses on Tibet and food security across Asia. When you talk about food in Tibet, the staples are tsampa, which are made from Tibetan barley flour and yak milk, cheese and butter. Living in a harsh, high-altitude environment, Tibetans developed ingenious methods of survival, heavily dependent on their yaks. Tibetan nomads raised yaks for their milk, butter, and cheese, and then bartered these foods with farmers growing barley. This enabled Tibet to be self-sustaining for food sources, although they imported huge loads of tea from China. Yak butter tea churned up by nomads is another unique aspect of Tibet, and a personal favorite of mine. And I'm not sure if it's because I'm growing older or really connecting with my roots, but these days I'm really enjoying tsampa for breakfast. Both tsampa and yak butter are used as offerings in temples in Tibet. Yak butter lamps often illuminate shrines. Throwing barley flour in the air is part of celebrations such as Losar, which is the Tibetan New Year. And for fun, some people like to throw the barley flour at each other rather than throwing it in the air. I've done that too, but I don't recommend that. Tibetans have a very strong connection with their land. Tibetans are among the first people to develop the concept of sacred earth, with mountains, lakes, and valleys to be left totally untouched. All of this has been severely disrupted under iron-fisted Chinese rule. We have a great lineup of speakers, poets, and artists for this one-hour event celebrating Earth Day Tibet. We're looking at huge problems that Tibet faces: desertification, loss of grasslands, shifting nomads en masse of their traditional grazing lands, extensive Chinese mining. We're also looking at the implications of all of this for food security in Tibet and across Asia, as well as looking at solutions. The theme of Earth Day 2021 is Restore Our Earth, focusing not only on the need to reduce our impact on the planet as we recover from the effects of COVID-19, but also how can we play a role in repairing the damage we've done. So I want to hand over now to India's best-known environmental activist, food and seed sovereignty advocate, and a prolific author, Dr. Vandana Shiva, speaking on this very topic.
Our beautiful Mother Earth is living. She's alive, she's creative, she's given us the bounties of biodiversity. And a few hundred years ago, some mistakes were made. First, colonizing lands, just to squeeze money out of territories and from the colonized people. Second, to justify colonization the idea that humans are separate from nature. And the earth is dead matter, inert raw material. These errors are the reason we have an ecological crisis. To restore the earth, it has to begin in our minds and in our hearts. To restore the earth, we have to realize we are part of an amazing earth. We are members of the earth family. We are not her masters and owners. To treat her as disposable, we are her children. And living as children, we shift our models of knowledge, we shift our models of economy. In knowledge, we realize we can co-create with the plants. That's what we do at the Earth University and Beach Vidyapith at Navdanya. And we produce more fruit. We grow more nutrition. There's a more abundant and bountiful nature. And we have more happiness and well-being. The second is to realize we are co-producers. The arrogance of humanity, the arrogance of anthropocentrism assumes that we messed up the earth, yes, but to restore the earth, we are the main players. No, we are one player in an amazing chain of being. And our work is service. Our work is earth care. The reason I've chosen to practice and promote organic farming and regenerative agriculture as the path of restoring the earth is because this is the service where with love we give back to the earth. We give back the leaves that she has given us. We give back the straws that she has given us and turn it into future soil fertility. Restoring the earth means belonging to the earth in humility. It means realizing that the right action is what is needed, and the rest the earth will do. Restoring the earth means restoring not just our humanity, but with it our humility, our oneness with all beings, including all human beings, as one humanity on one planet.
The environmental crisis that we are facing today is really unprecedented. We all know how polluted the waters are, the air is. In fact, we need to know that the four elements within our psychophysical aggregate are very much related to the four elements outside of us. Any disturbance, imbalance created on the external element is creating imbalance and disturbance in our internal elements. We have clearly seen today the negative consequences of our harming the earth, harming the environment, and harming the animals. The pandemic crisis that we are facing today is a clear story of that. Let us replace selfishness with selfless love, and let us learn to respect the Mother Earth. Let us love the Mother Earth. Buddha very clearly said that loving something is different from liking something. When you like a flower, you might pluck it, but when you love a flower, you might water it. So therefore, when I say love the planet Earth, it means preserve it, look after it, and do not harm for our own well-being and goodness. Thank you.
On behalf of the International Campaign for Tibet, Teshitele and greetings to everyone on this Earth Day. For thousands of years, we Tibetans have been living on the Tibetan Plateau, surrounded by snow-capped mountains, serene green pasturelands, and azure blue skies. Our people lived happily generation after generation, guided by our worldview and cultural practices that gave us a sense of universal responsibility for mankind and nature, teaching us to live harmoniously and protecting the plateau that is known to all of us as the roof of the world. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama explains, Tibetans have always considered ourselves as part of our environment. Our ancient scriptures speak of the container and the contained. The world is the container, our home, and we are the contained, the contents of that container. From these simple facts, we deduced a special relationship because without the container, the contents cannot be contained. And without the contents, the container contains nothing. It's meaningless. As in His Holiness's 5-point peace plan for Tibet, he proposed that all of Tibet become a sanctuary, a zone of peace. And he explained, peace means harmony. Harmony between people, harmony between people and animals, harmony between sentient beings and the environment. He envisioned such a Tibet where every visitor could experience true peace and harmony. But the reality, the real Tibet today remains under occupation by China, and the Tibetan plateau and its environment are changing drastically. Chinese policies are threatening and destroying the fragile ecosystem and environment of Tibet. Scientists warn us that what happens in Tibet has an impact for the whole planet. As the source of the 8 largest river systems in the world, Tibet impacts more than 1 billion people in Asia. Tibet is known as the Earth's third pole because it has the largest reserves of fresh water outside the Arctic and the Antarctic, and it is a land of enormous glaciers. But these reserves are now shrinking. Climate change and the exploitation of Tibet's natural resources, particularly water, have led to landslides, floods, pollution, and unstable water flows downstream. Scientists say that Tibet is warming nearly 3 times as fast as the rest of the world, showing that its environmental health is in crisis. The Dalai Lama has been raising the alarm on the need to protect Tibet's natural environment. Tibet's unique ecology and its preservation matters to the world and to all of humanity. In this time, it is critically important for political decision makers to support and pass initiatives that will address these issues. The recent new and updated Tibet Policy and Support Act of 2021, passed by the United States Congress, confronts China directly over its repression and actions in Tibet. Among many issues, this law addresses water security and climate change in Tibet. Under this law, the United States recognizes the strategic importance of the Tibetan plateau and the threat that climate change poses to it. The United States Secretary of State will have to pursue collaborations with China and international institutions to monitor Tibet's environment and support Tibetan people's efforts to preserve it. The Secretary will also have to encourage a regional framework on water security. These are important steps that also send an encouraging message to other like-minded, responsible democracies around the globe. I invite you to learn more by visiting our website, savetibet.org, and take some action for Tibet. It's been a pleasure joining you today on this special program on Earth Day, and I want to thank the organizers, Meltdown in Tibet, as well as all the participants and all of you viewers with us here today. Thank you.
Kalawachik Pete, Iskablatul Yadon Sotan Young Pony. Was an image Homu Shanshikitam Nihomi of Dunker Sambada. I would have chosen Toy, Temperament Nihomi and Yonton Daishi. Ya, that's it, Tama, Dunker Sinchukunda Johnson, Nachi, and Nimbo, and Leeches, Tochen and Mantan. Tango and Wapa, Sonam Sinchu, Datan, Jamaica, don't you pencil a deeper. Lataki, Shayan, or G. Serge.
야동 소가 생각 니도 몸을 쇼바 미리 쇼바요 단소 가부 강지라 왜 거기 인증가나 전티 초가 용나 세부 세지 깨르고 니도 쇼도 뒤수 님이 방니 도로 이렇게 통화돼 세상 공부를 쉬고 처를 머리 때 히를 어찌 놓진 잠을 넘겨 쓰던 저런 절 고들 잠스 오빠 소 니도 쇼도 강지 못다 미나 강지 워미 라케인 니도 쇼도 뒤수 하이 보냐 인나 무슨 가고 오나인 니도 쇼도 별이 살아 정글 삼이 저 시험 체제 무부 무이 정펠 니도 쇼도 와비 살아 정글 삼이 저 시험 다시 무슨 가고 치라쇼 니도 몸이 총사 가사 레우 너는 오지 파사 제사 레우 정글 삼이 저 시험 가사 레우 정글 삼이 저 시험 가사 레우 니도 몸이 총사 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 가사 레우 닌저 몸이 독지인나 주빙아 땅나 뜨정 너는 삼성 공진 몸이 제비 밥 셰마티 파일 카트 제정 동물 스포 정트랑 라오쇼 라밀 용화 년리 편的제가 인나요 리지차 리지 형어 마치 라마쿠 심비롱 조마토 년리 편的제特인나요 닌저 몸이 쇼와 마브제的일라 송당 세난돌 정글 삼비 과전 마브제的일라 송당 세난돌
Over the last 2 years, the Scottish Parliament's cross-party group on Tibet have been carrying out an inquiry into the effects of climate change on the Tibetan Plateau and its surrounding mountain ranges, often collectively called the Third Pole. This involved reviewing nearly 1,000 scientific works on the area from international research centres all around the globe. A key element of this inquiry has been the rapid desertification of the Tibetan Plateau that has occurred over the last 20 years. Of course, desertification has been a blight on Asia for thousands of years, and East Asia most particularly, but that process has accelerated dramatically in the last century. The People's Republic of China has undoubtedly felt the brunt of this process, with established desert areas making up 2.6 million square kilometers, that is 27% of its land area, with estimates of desert expansion in the PRC being between 2,000 and 10,000 square kilometers per year, impacting the lives and livelihoods of nearly 400 million people. Much of this is concentrated in the west and northwest of the country, but it is on the Tibetan Plateau where desertification has expanded most dramatically in recent decades. Despite the widespread melting of glaciers across this vast highland region, almost half the size of Europe, and increases in flooding and lake increase, the Tibetan Plateau has seen its high-altitude grasslands turn progressively to desert. More worryingly still, many of the plateau's river headlands, the source of almost all of Asia's major rivers, are progressively drying up, accelerating the loss of wildlife in the region and threatening the stability of Asia's freshwater supplies. The traditional approach to this kind of puzzle has been to blame desertification almost exclusively on how the land is used. And in Tibet, state policy concern has pointed towards the traditional Drokpa nomad communities, whose grazing of yaks and goats, a lifestyle that has endured for centuries, has been blamed for degrading the soil in recent decades. However, more recent scientific evidence has pointed towards the possibility of a deeper, hidden, and more disturbing cause, the effect that global climate change has had on Tibet's vital cryosphere, with potentially devastating effects for the whole of Asia. Tibet's cryosphere, its domain of ice, make it the heartland of the third pole, that is, the largest accumulation of ice on Earth outside the Arctic and Antarctic. Tibet's cryosphere is found in three forms. Two are very familiar: its snow and its glaciers, both of which have been deeply affected by the increase in global temperatures. However, the vast majority of the third pole's ice lies hidden from sight underground, in the permafrost. Permafrost is soil that is permanently frozen, and in the world's colder regions it is usually to be found between 1 and 2 meters beneath the surface, underneath what is called the active layer, that top layer of soil that melts during the summer months. Across much of the third pole, permafrost exists quite literally as a huge hidden underground iceberg, sometimes as much as 1 kilometer deep. Underneath the permafrost layer itself is an unfrozen ground, often called talik, warmed by geothermal heat from below and dry from the lack of water. Now, the presence of permafrost affects the way water moves under the ground. Because the permafrost layer is ice, it is effectively waterproof. And so melting water from rain, snow, and melting glaciers stays close to the surface, where it can feed crops and grasses, making life on the plateau habitable. But in the last 70 years, the third pole has persistently warmed, bringing more and more areas up above freezing, and progressively melting the permafrost layer across the plateau and surrounding mountain ranges. This is a map, for example, of ground temperatures across the plateau in the 1960s. And this is the same for the 2000s. As the ground warms and the active layer deepens, holes begin to appear in the underground ice shield of permafrost. This allows meltwater that previously fed vegetation on the surface to drain deep into the underlying dry earth. Under the influence of gravity, the water table falls far below where the roots of grasses, vegetation, and crops can reach it, and the active layer on the surface begins to dry out and turn to desert, turning this into this, and this into this. Confirmation of this picture has recently come from NASA's hugely important GRACE and GRACE-FO satellite program. These twin satellites measure microscopic changes in the Earth's gravitational field caused by the movement of large bodies of water underground. Their results indicate that while the Tibetan plateau may be drying out on the surface, deep underground it is accumulating water at between 7 and 9 gigatons a year. That's between 7 and 9,000 million tons every year. If these results are correct, then this means that the desertification of the Tibetan plateau is a sign that just as we are seeing the gradual collapse of the Arctic and Antarctic ice packs, we are also witnessing the structural collapse of the third pole cryosphere. This will profoundly affect the way water moves within the Tibetan plateau and the way that water cycles back down to the oceans along the course of Asia's major rivers, almost all of which flow out of the third pole region. Unlike the other two poles, however, nearly half of the world's population live on Tibet's doorstep and depend upon the fresh water that comes off it for agriculture, industry, and everyday survival. In this respect, the desertification we have been witnessing over the last 20 years could easily prove to be the forerunner of far more profound changes that will affect the very capacity of Asia to sustain itself.
kankarye sibe kangliye zemo nam kyang tu zawaden kanga zemo ne chu yu tang silpe zang chu yu sang ki zang chu yu
Hi, and welcome to Earth Day Tibet. I'm going to talk about grasslands and nomads and mining and food security in Tibet and across Asia. And just want to point out that the song you just heard from Loten Namling is a traditional song about better days when the nomads had very good food supply. They had so much food, they had a surplus, so they'd use the surplus to trade with farmers for barley and with merchants for other goods. Unfortunately, that's no longer the case. and currently the Tibetan nomads are starving, deprived of their food sources. And this is not the first time this has happened, far from it. We go back to the 1960s, the early 1960s, China instituted a policy of growing wheat in Tibet to supply China, which was suffering from a huge famine. And in the process, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Tibetans starved to death. And it was only eventually when they returned to the crop of barley, which is more suitable for high altitude farming, that the balance was restored. Meanwhile, on the grasslands in the 1960s, 1970s, the entire stock of Tibetan wildlife just vanished. Tibet was home to millions and millions of wild animals, grazers on the grasslands, ranging from wild yaks to kiang, that's a Tibetan wild ass, Tibetan antelopes, gazelles. According to the British observers that were there, as far as the eye could see, you'd have massive herds of these animals. They vanished. You don't see any herds of these animals anymore, the wild ones. So this is possibly one of the greatest wildlife crimes of the 20th century. What happened to all those animals? It appears that the Chinese settlers and military ate them. This started off during the famine years, as I mentioned before, but it later extended to sport and slaughter with machine guns. Following this, another catastrophe happened was that the forests of East Tibet, Kamanamdo, simply disappeared. They were cut down for furniture and chopsticks. And this was only stopped in the late 1990s when massive flooding on the Yangtze happened because the forests were holding back the landslides and mudslides. So there's a bit of background. Then we move forward to more catastrophe. 2006, the railway arrived in Lhasa. And I think the best way to explain this is to show you this painting, which is a parody of Edvard Munch, The Scream of Nature. And you can see what's happening with the railway here. The railway brings in, for the first time, an economical basis, the possibility of building megadams, bringing in migrant workers, and bringing in migrant workers to operate mining concerns. So Tibet had never been exploited for mining until the railway arrived. And then it accelerated like crazy. There's something like 125 minerals discovered in Tibet, ranging from uranium, which is used for the Chinese nuclear program, and lithium, which is the metal of the moment today. China has pretty much a monopoly on the world supply of lithium, and part of that is coming from Tibet. We don't know how much. So what's happened here is that this has accelerated since the arrival of the train, because the train has made it economical to exploit the resources for the first time and send them across to eastern China, where the minerals are processed. And what does this mean for the rest of Asia? Well, a couple of things to point out. The grasslands are a massive carbon sink, very, very large. I mean, the Tibetan Plateau is the size of Western Europe, and these grasslands are immense. And this carbon sink is it's providing a lid for the permafrost that's hidden under the grasslands. And without, as you've seen in a previous presentation, desertification is a huge problem. So if the desertification starts encroaching on the grasslands, then you're going to have problems like permafrost releasing methane, very powerful greenhouse gas, which will impact not only Asia, will impact the entire planet. And then we have another problem with food supply for Asia, which is sediment. Well, sediment comes down the rivers in huge volume, and sediment is a cocktail of nutrients that plants, wild plants and agriculture, they all need it. So without the sediment, you're going to have to use artificial fertilizer like nitrogen, which has disastrous effects for the environment. So megadams, which have been popping up since the 1990s, first they'll block 10% of the sediment. Then it goes to 20%, then it'll go to 50, then it will eventually go to 90, and even 99% of the sediment will be blocked, which is disaster for countries like Vietnam, the major rice grower in the Mekong Delta. And then you have the problem with fishing. Migration is disrupted by these dams also. The big fish species will start to go extinct, which has already happened in Cambodia, which is heavily reliant for protein on fish. So where does this go? Where does it stop? We don't know, but if you want an example, you should look next door to Tibet and look at Bhutan, which has done everything the right way. And they have set aside 51% of their land area for national parks and wildlife reserves to encourage biodiversity. They protect their wildlife. They make sure that the food sources are secure, and they have all organic farming. These are things that China could have done long ago in Tibet, but is too busy exploiting the place, and that's where the tragedy of Tibet lies today.
We're pleased to feature some Tibetan poets reading in English here. Tibet has a long tradition of poetry and song. In fact, the oldest known fragment of written Tibetan, dating from the 9th century, discovered at Dunhuang, includes these lines. This center of heaven, this core of the earth, fenced round with snow, the headland of all rivers, where the mountains are high and the land is pure. This shows the immense pride that Tibetans have for their pristine high-altitude environment. Fast forward to the 21st century, to the land of melting snows, where poets and singers in Tibet are given lengthy jail sentences for their works. We're introducing here Tibetan-Australian poet Sung Chung Ki with a powerful poem titled Earth's Lament, and a reading by Tenzin Namdul titled Meditations on Barley.
This is part 3 of the lecture, the last part, and this one is specifically, we're going to have a look at the songs and poems of Sung Chung Ki, who is a Tibetan refugee who lives in Melbourne, Australia, and her songs talk about the changes in climate and the environment and political changes both in her homeland.
You, what are you doing? Do you really need to disembowel me? Do you want to cast my insides to the wind? You are not swords or arrows, but you split my body. You are not bandits or thieves, but you steal my body's vitality. What evil have I done? It was my youthful fertility that produced civilizations, provided a future for human nations. Why then do you humans neglect me? My lifeblood nurtured countless plants and beings, my dear children, and you have smashed them. In anger, you even pluck out my grass, my body hairs. Why? Is living like this my karma, or is it just a trick of the times? I am afraid. Everyone stares at me with their eyes and mouths open. They want to consume my abundance, my vitality. My flesh is on fire. Can you smell it burning? Can you smell the fat sizzling? You turn my precious guts inside out. You take out the parts of me prized for their gold and silver and scatter them. You have inflicted such pain on my body, and yet it still heaves with more treasures. How do I cope with what's to come? My lifeblood moves through each and every one of my golden sand grains. I'm here for the happiness, sadness, the lives of all wanderers, everyone under the sky. How did I provoke such hostility? My outer husk, my green, grassy plains have become deserts. My moist insides are brimming with toxins. Gehu, what is this unbearable torture? How do I bear your unbearable beatings? It shouldn't be like this. When my life supports collapse, they block my blood flow. I am this world, this vessel. I hold many beings within me. How will I nurture them now? I'm begging you, right now, I cannot maintain my life supports. I cannot sustain my breath. If you want your expected long lives, then let me rest and recuperate. Let me sing my lament. And you, Earth's evil vandals, will you hear it?
Meditations on Barley by Tenzin Namdul. Tsamba soup. I saw this vestige of my culture on sale at a Patagonia retail store. It's a dehydrated instant soup that comes to life when you add a little bit of hot water. Made for probably white adventure seekers who will inevitably descend from sacred Himalayan peaks and then seek me out to tell me that they saw my country. They'll tell me how beautiful my land is, how strong the people are, the incredible generosity of the incredibly poor. They'll ask me if I've ever been to my homeland without ever knowing the deep intergenerational heartbreak of that question. Their curiosity is like the $6.50 exotified dust of a commodity that shares the namesake of meals my grandfather ate when he circumambulated Mount Kailash, when Tibet was a sovereign nation, when fields of barley grew on my family's farm in the Girong region of southern Tibet. Tsampa in its most simple state is roasted barley flour. Tsampa is what I have left of a culture and land from which I have been uprooted. Tibetans have a strong relationship to barley. It grows well even in high elevation and cold conditions. Archaeologists note of long-standing settlements with evidence of food cultivation and livestock dating back as early as 3,200 years ago, around the same time barley came to the Tibetan plateau. Barley and sheep allowed people to settle the land and transform the once scarce and harsh landscape into one with an abundant and hearty food supply. This essentially created Tibetan culture, totally not backed up by proper science, but definitely backed up by this Tibetan. During Losar, the Tibetan New Year, every altar in every Tibetan home is decorated with a sheep head and, you guessed it, barley, everything. Seeds, stalks, and flour. We put it in soups to heal our children from colds, take it on long journeys, use it during ritual and special ceremonies. It's everywhere. Tibetan culture in all its romanticized, exotified, misunderstood glory exists today because of barley, because of Tsampa. It is both root and crown, both heart and sacral in perfect balance. Even after the Chinese occupation of Tibet in 1959, barley still grows on the plateau because barley doesn't care what mouths it feeds, which tongues chew and gnaw at her cell walls. Plants are magic like that. They don't know about occupation, dislocation, disconnection. Barley is deep-rooted, holds the land together to prevent erosion, as a cheap crop nourishes the poor. I find myself crying looking at a packaged meal in a retail outlet mall, thinking all these things, contemplating how I can sneak back into my own country because the government doesn't like to hand out travel visas for people with Tibetan names from other countries. The way the Chinese government sees it, those are the kinds of Tibetans who are spreading separatism by firstly following the Dalai Lama out of the country after the occupation, and secondly demanding freedom. I fit both of those criteria. It would be much more difficult for me to get access to Tibet than a person with a non-Tibetan name. So I don't want to hear gleeful, almost always white mountaineers and adventure seekers telling me how great my country is, because I don't know that for myself. I never have. Don't feed me unwelcomed reportbacks, and don't feed my heartbreak. I'll feed myself real Tsampa soup, the kind my mom made me when I was sick, the kind my grandpa carried with him to Mount Kailash, the kind that doesn't need a marketing team to sell, because it's in my DNA.
Dashtale and welcome everyone to Earth Day Tibet. I hope you're enjoying the show so far. My name is Seju Joma, and I'm the founder of Mountain Resiliency Project. I founded Mountain Resiliency Project along with our community members back in 2012 as a direct response to the adverse impacts of climate change and globalization that is playing out in the borderland communities between Tibet, Nepal, and India. We started this work because we were seeing that climate change was impacting the access to food, access to water, access to a lot of social relations that was disintegrating in this region. Whether this was due to migration or whether this was due to transnational issues, it was happening, and the youth in these communities want to be able to find a future within the mountain region. So as a response to this, we were able to come up with agricultural technique training, women's entrepreneurship fellowship. We were able to come up with irrigation systems that combine modern technology with traditional irrigation knowledge. And we were able to build an intergenerational platform for the youth and older folks to come together and develop a curriculum where we learn about how do we prepare ourselves for a climate future, and how do we build a future within our communities. So with all of this going on, this is a very sensitive region with political powers from China and India and the Nepalese government all coming together. And a lot of locals receive direct grants and aid from the Chinese government. And this comes as a bribe, and this comes with a lot of spying, and this comes with a lot of watchful eyes from the local government. And we constantly had to be very careful as all of our moves, whether it's for training mushroom farming, it always came under surveillance from the Nepalese government. So due to this, our work along the border regions had to stop. But we are still able to continue our work through local partnerships, and we're able to continue doing agricultural technique training and provide small grants for smallholder farmers in this region. But all of this has to go through several nonprofits in the region. So with all of this going on, we have to be very careful. But nonetheless, our communities are still facing the same flash floods, the same access to water issues, the same political issues, whether it's leaning towards their northern neighbor or whether it's leaning towards the southern neighbor. A lot of this is coming into action. And we're also seeing a lot of natural disasters in this region, whether it's the flooding that's causing, that's increasing the disparity across gender, across caste, across ethnicities. Communities that have been marginalized continue to be marginalized. And while we are working really hard to fill in this gap, we're trying our best to support grassroots communities that are working on this, especially the youth. So there has also been benefits to this climate change in terms of now there's road building going on. While this road building is directly impacting the fragile ecosystem, it is also connecting communities like never before. There's infrastructure building, such as internet broadband, 4G, 5G, everywhere. That's increasing access to education, healthcare systems. Apple growing with the warmer climate coming up the mountain. A lot more communities are able to tap into economies they weren't able to, such as apples. So there's a lot of opportunities and there's a lot of challenges that's happening right now. But this is a region that is very special to me. This is special to a lot of Tibetans, Nepalese. This is the region where a lot of our families, when we fled from Tibet, this is where we were trying to build our livelihood. And this is where a lot of the young people today are now leaving to seek opportunities in Kathmandu, New Delhi, or North America or Europe. So a lot of this is happening, and we're trying directly to support the grassroots work. And I'm doing my best here to raise awareness about what's happening out there and how can we continue to support local social entrepreneurship, and how do we keep spreading these ideas so that there is a future that we can build within mountain communities. Thank you.
Kusampula, I am Namkizam from Bhutan, and I'm here to talk about my country in relation to the environment and climate change. For those of you who are familiar with my country, you would be aware of how wonderfully we have preserved our environment and how wonderfully we've worked with it so that we are a carbon sink. We are not just carbon neutral, we are carbon negative, and among the only 2 countries in the world to be able to claim so. This has happened because of the enlightened leadership of our kings and a development philosophy of gross national happiness that ensures that through good governance, which balances economic development as well as environmental conservation, we're able to place where we are today. So we are a carbon sink, but we also have sustainable economic development. We are also a biodiversity hotspot among the few countries in the world to be able to claim that. We've just done wonderfully when it comes to environmental preservation. The Constitution of Bhutan mandates that at least 60% of our area remain under forest cover for all time, and at the moment it's about 72%. So we've done remarkably well. There are so many things that we can boast about in Bhutan that we've done right when it comes to the environment, when it comes to how much we've done for Mother Earth. But unfortunately, we are not immune to the adverse effects of climate change, global warming. Although we've done everything right for the environment, we have encountered the risk of glacial lake outburst floods. In fact, in the recent past, we had a glacial lake outburst flood with disastrous consequences, and GLOF is a real threat to the Bhutanese people, because we have what used to be glaciers before are now melting at an alarming rate, and then now we have glacial lakes numbering in the thousands, more than 2,000, and hence the threat of glacial lake outburst floods in Bhutan. That is worrying for Bhutanese people. I hope that we all take action to do things that are good, not just for ourselves, but for others. Bhutan has done it so far. I hope that neighboring countries and other countries in the world also do their part, so that we people or countries like Bhutan don't have to suffer adverse consequences for actions that are not our own.
This is the conclusion of Earth Day Tibet 2021. We hope you've enjoyed the presentations and have learned more about the current situation inside Tibet and about the vital role that Tibet plays for food security across Asia. We would like to thank all the speakers, poets, and presenters for their time and energy and for their valuable ideas. Thanks to Meltdown in Tibet for producing this event. We hope you'll share this event widely across your social media channels because Tibet is suffering and needs all the attention it can get. On a positive note, it's encouraging to see that there are solutions now in progress in neighboring Ladakh, Sikkim, and Bhutan. Bhutan and Sikkim foster all organic crops and have set aside large areas for national parks and wildlife sanctuaries which foster biodiversity and ensure survival of the Tibetan Plateau and the survival of Asia. Ladakh is promoting solar energy on a vast scale as a viable alternative to damming the rivers of Tibet. I'll leave you with this quote from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Destruction of nature and natural resources results from ignorance, greed, and lack of respect for the earth's living beings. Our ancestors viewed the earth as rich and bountiful, which it is. Many people in the past also saw nature as inexhaustibly sustainable, which we now know is the case only if we care for it. So take care of the earth, take care of others, and take care of yourself. Stay safe, and thank you to our viewers for tuning in on Earth Day Tibet 2021. Pygyalo.